policy coming in play, that we have a very strong bilaterals with Bangladesh. Bangladesh is important because with India, Bangladesh has a very workable coastal shipping agreement. And with the Bangladesh, India has amicably resolved its boundary disputes, land as well as on the marine. And with Bangladesh, we have economic relations is fairly good. It's growing. We have a good production linkages with Bangladesh. That gives lots of relations to other ASEAN countries, also at the bilateral level. We have a sub-regional, it's called Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Myanmar. That's more on the land connectivity sides, but it's coming up. And working regional, BIMSTEC, ASEAN, and IORA, those are at various stages of development, and there's high variations. Like with ASEAN, we have FTA. And last year, particularly, India has achieved the 81.33 billion bilateral trade with ASEAN. And the first time that since we signed the FTA. So trade is coming back between them, and we expect this 100 billion trade between India and ASEAN by 2020. With IORA and the BIMSTEC, very important, not just for strategic purpose, also for the economics and the connectivity. So any connectivity plan on the maritime, we have to factor in these three aspects. And if you look at India's maritime network, how it is emerging, that Sagarmala project, which Secretary East mentioned in the morning, as India has attracted US $13 billion in maritime and port sector development. That's the proposal. How much is coming in the implementations, we can debate, but 13 billion is quite a big number. So there are several new projects coming up on the Indian coast. India is a marine economy, so also in ASEAN, and we need to look at both closely. In between, this new emerging is the Indo-Pacific, and where the marine strategic aspects is coming in very, very important role. And in what we look at the maritime infrastructure or maritime connectivity within India-Japan partnerships, we call it quality resilient infrastructure. So we give a newer outlook and newer perspectives to the infrastructure development, not just like doing, the infrastructure it used to be. So this is the sum of the changes that we look at when we talk about India, ASEAN in the blue economic context. But the challenging aspects, which we feel that the trade is not picking up, and I have a line graph. The red line is basically GDP growth, and the blue line is the trade growth, and the star, which is basically the ratio between them. But you can come down. There's always in the globally, there will be so many spikes up, down, etc. But the one which is coming, the 2016, at the end of the graph, it indicates a downward trend. So there is a gloomy pictures coming, and you know very well why. This is because of trade restrictiveness coming up. Countries are imposing the trade barriers. For example, trade tariff has been increased, many products across the board between the US and the state partners. So these reciprocal trade restrictions in different forms are not certainly good, and this is going to affect certainly that connectivity planning, because your port development, shipping development, the blue economy aspects, those are all interrelated. And India in particular, we are facing the new quotas and tariffs, anti-dumping duties, restriction of visas, and some of the barriers are also, in Indian professionals, IT professionals or others, they move into Southeast Asia, they also face some of the barriers. And Singapore, that's a good example for us, in the managing maritime infrastructure services. And Singapore is a country from ASEAN which is continuously investing in the Indian marine sectors. Some of the terminals by Port of Singapore Authority. We have, in India, we have around 700 billion trade. Most of it, be it in air traffic or shipping, most of it is actually picked up by the foreign carriers. Our carriers for the container or are basically given up. We have an open sky or open shipping policies. So, and we have Singapore and some of the ports in the Malaysia, like Port Klang and others. We can do the more learning experiences that we can draw from them. But if we trade is slowing down, how much we can do together? That's the point we need to discuss. And can ASEAN and India jointly drive somewhere the global trade agenda? And if the global trade is not doing well, this is perhaps an opportunity also for us to do more closer relations in terms of trade, in terms of connectivity. Look at the figures that we have country-wise between India and ASEAN. This is, India's exports as coming back, because this is a big issue, because we have signed FTA, but discussion is happening that this FTA is not giving us much to the Indian exporters. It is all about the import story. But frankly speaking, we cannot give much data that how much trade India exporting or importing with its ASEAN partners is routed through FTA. We don't have actually the specific informations. But the generally is that the trade Indian exports is picked up when we signed the FTA 23 billion, and when today, 2017-18, 34, certainly there are some influence given by the FTA. We cannot just say this is just a natural progress. It is not an FTA driven. And of course, import will be more because we have a rising production linkages, automobile sectors, the parts and components coming from Philippines or Indonesia's finished automobiles going to ASEAN countries. So the import will be certainly more. What India has done, for the last 2-3 years, that we have an inverted duty structure, that we put more duty to the intermediate goods than the finished products. That has been getting rectified. So it means that the tariff across the goods, when it's coming to the board, they are sort of a fair play, across the importers in textiles or in automobiles, which are very important. And graph indicates that just the two lines, the red lines, is when we signed the FTA and when it was the present. So certainly this is a scenario with India, ASEAN, FTA, and probably a good time we see. But again, there is nothing fixed in the trade, because what is today is good, maybe is a bad, maybe in the tomorrow. So this is it. So what are the expected developments we see in this time? Certainly this is a time that we do the more physical and digital connectivity, particularly in the maritime infrastructure connectivity, in terms of maritime domain awareness. That will be discussed when NMF scholars will be talking about. I'm not an expert on this. But we see also that we need to look at the trade facilitation, which is part of maritime connectivity very closely. We signed WTO trade facilitation agreement. All the ASEAN countries and India ratified it, but we haven't yet implemented. So we ratified, we're not coming forward in terms of trade facilitation agreement implementation. So there are issues about the customs, port authorities. Those are well addressed, at least in the Schedule A countries who have committed to WTO trade facilitation. Plus, there are issues when you're coming to NTMs like mutual recognition, harmonization of standards, process simplifications, e-trade, transparencies. One example we can give: the certifying authority of the standards of the shipping companies, the vessels. Basically, globally, it is a Lloyd register, registered in London. But each and every country has its own standards. But never the standard authorities in ASEAN and India never met. No way. Those who are certifying the standards of the vessels in Philippines or maybe in ASEAN, they might be doing some in the regional corporations. But probably when you talk about greater connectivity in the context of blue economy, you need to look at the standard certifying bodies who are looking into the vessel standardizations. There are uncertainties, South China Sea, trade protection, natural disasters. Of course, those are very important. When you look at the volume-wise trade, we have the 2015-16. With ASEAN, the volume is big. Basically the coal or edible oil, petroleum products, India exports to this country. Those are very high volume trade, and we do not have port-to-port contacts, except some of the ports. We have a direct call, like Jalandhar Port or Chennai. But then in terms of direct call for the containers, if you compare to the China, we don't come at all much closer to that. So, but volume is very high, and maybe we need to look at what kind of port infrastructure we need, and what sort of the port relations we build with the ASEAN countries and the Indian ports. So these are the statistics. It gives, it tells that we need to look at more port relations more closely between India and ASEAN. The India Sagarmala projects, which is the beginning from the Indian sides. India is going to add about more than 1 million ton capacity by 2020 under the projects, and across the west and east coast. East coast is more concerned about, because this is maritime wise, it's closer to the ASEAN, and these are the capacities, certainly. So there are the discussions happening that what would be the hub port in the east side, and what would be the hub port from the western side, apart from the Singapore or Port Klang or some of the other bigger ports. Can we have a new ports in the Bay of Bengal for the trade and on development of the industrializations? Professor P.T. is here. He is part of the projects which we are thinking about. Now, how do we take forward India-ASEAN maritime connectivity? Some of the recommendations that we did the study 2-3 years back. I think the 5 issues are very important. These are the issues if we discuss about the blue economy. Also in context of bilateral ASEAN-India maritime connectivity. First of all is that we don't need much capital investments to take up these are the points. For example, the mutual recognition of vessel standards issued by certifying authorities, a network, a meeting by the governments, it would be good enough to call, to look at that, to learn from each other's, and probably start a discussion about the common mutual understanding. Synchronization of master plan of the projects. As I said, the Sagarmala projects is about more than 1 billion capacity India is going to add in the ports. So we need to certainly look at how the Indonesian ports are doing under its global maritime Fulcrum projects, or we need to know how Singapore is doing. So there should be some kind of synchronizations. Otherwise, there would be some excess capacities, or there could be a shortfall of capacities. That can we do this in the umbrella of ASEAN-India blue economy? Track 1 dialogue or some kind of forum. We need to know the interoperability of digital interfaces, port community digital interfaces in India. It doesn't talk with Thais or some other countries, In the customs single window, we certainly discuss, and there is a project of the interoperability of custom interfaces. That is the SWIFT, the customs cooperation, ASEAN single window. We have a projects to link up. But in the port community systems, there is no such kind of thing. Maybe ASEAN and India may think about it, how to link the interoperability. We need to know the port infrastructure information. Sometimes the port related information is to come much earlier than the vessel arrives. This point, the auto license of the vessels operators going in overseas. I was briefed like that in India in particular, those who are operating the coastal cargo, they are not allowed to take the foreign responsibility. So some kind of, even though there is a shortfall of or capacity, maybe we look into the automatic license to the vessel operators if they are going to the overseas. And gradual relaxation of the cabotage on a reciprocal basis. There would be sensitivity because relaxation of cabotage means you are entering into more serious debate. But trust me, in context of BIMSTEC, which is the coastal shipping agreement being negotiated, countries have offered on reciprocal basis full relaxation of the cabotage in the Bay of Bengal. And when it comes to ASEAN-India, maybe we think on the partial or relaxation of the cabotage. And these are, possible. If you are allowing a fifth freedom right to the international airlines, maybe you bring, foreign vessels, help us to transport the domestic cargo transportation as well. I'm just coming to the end of my last slide. Shaping the maritime connectivity and the cooperations, the groundwork has been done by India's Delhi Declaration this year, the 25th year celebrations. If you carefully look at the Delhi Declaration, it is all about the maritime corporations. So 25th year celebration this year, 25th of January, the 10 lead ASEAN leaders in India, they agreed to take forward the maritime cooperation agenda. Sagar Initiative, this is the foundation of Indo-Pacific, India's Sagarmala projects, India-ASEAN Maritime Transport Agreement, BIMSTEC Coastal Shipping Agreement, and some of the bilateral issues. So lots of things are happening in the maritime sectors. These are the good things. Some of the best lines are I think that these were not there, even a few years back. In terms of recommendations, 3 important steps from our side we can place for the discussion. One is that ASEAN-India shall jointly uphold their commitment to freedom of navigation and overflight in the regions. From NMF, we need to have more discussions on it. Then in terms of advancement of the knowledge and expertise sharing in the blue economy, ASEAN-India shall work together in exchange of information on white shipping. NMF will talk about more on this. And we think about and track 1.5 forum, because we don't have any forum to talk about ASEAN-India on the blue economy, to exchange our informations. So these are the 3 important steps I place for the discussion, the debate. We can take it up. Next, policy recommendations, which is doable, which are the doable things, is that without much capital investments again, is that we can set up a ASEAN-India port network. ASEAN has a network.